We have placed emphasis on decision-making frameworks and using that rubric to take calls. Sometimes the riskiest course of action is inaction. And so you have to take action, you have to respond if you're behind, and you have to be proactive if you're ahead. So in terms of being decisive, it's the only way for a founder to survive and thrive. How to take decisions, we've evolved a few times our approach towards that, and there's a few principles that we follow. One, of course, is problem I see plaguing a lot of companies, which we call the hippo effect, which is the highest paid person's opinion. And often decisions are taken by the person who gets paid the most, or the most senior person. We've tried hard, especially at Pocket Aces, to not ever be a hippo effect kind of company where decisions are being taken by just people based on seniority. That we've had an approach where we listen to all opinions, and then the owner of any decision takes that decision. Now, the owner of a decision can vary from decision to decision, from task to task. So there could be a process where some individual is an owner, and there are people above them too, but they are not the owner of that decision. So we let people take their own decisions where they're the owner of a particular task. That's something we try to do.
My next guest on the 1% Project is Ashwin Suresh. This is an intriguing conversation where Ashwin walks us through his journey from investment banking on Wall Street to becoming a new media entrepreneur, building Pocket Aces and Loco. In this conversation, he talks about his decision of going from investment banking to new media, how he navigated through the new media industry without any background and network, his first angel investor, Mohan, how Mohan funded the whole angel round and kept himself invested even after Ashwin and his co-founder planned to pivot the business, launching Loco, a gaming platform in a very competitive and a well-funded ecosystem, finding product market fit in the content industry, being a decisive founder, and much more. If you have any feedback about this conversation, topic, or speaker recommendations, you can drop me a line at pritish@1%.live. You can also sign up for the 1% Project's newsletter at 1%.live for show notes and key insights from this conversation and every other conversation. Welcome, Ashwin, to the 1% Project.
Thank you, Pritish. Glad to be here.
You had one of the most envied jobs in the world. Why did you choose to enroll in a film institute?
It was envied before I had it. When I had it was when the financial crisis took place. 2008, I don't think anyone was envying it. No, look, it was an interesting time. I started investment banking in 2007. Where things looked like they could go off balance a little bit. And then by the end of 2007, we knew things were bad. And one of the interesting features about investment banking, it is a feature, not a bug, is that you are overworked and overpaid. And you putting in 7 days a week, 16 to 18 hours a day is not unusual. And so we got used to that for the first year and a half. That was the norm. As the macro started to get worse and the financial market started to wobble a little bit, we found ourselves, a lot of us analysts found ourselves with more time on our hands. And we didn't know what to do because they don't tell you what to do if you have more time on your hands. A series of fortunate coincidences ended up with me living in a building that shared a wall with the New York Film Academy. So literally, if I looked out of I had a studio apartment, if I looked out of the window, I would see the brick wall of the New York Film Academy. And so when I had more time on my hands, it almost seemed like it was just providence. I had to go and enroll myself. And filmmaking and media had been an interest area for a long time. I was just afraid to admit it publicly because that's not what good Indian boys do. Good Indian boys study engineering and then work in engineering or work in something that their families will be proud of. I'd been toying with the idea secretly, but never really took it seriously. And this was just an opportunity to take it a bit more seriously than just an interest area. That's why.
And how was the experience? Like when you went there, was it something that you expected or was it something very different and it just opened a new world for you?
It gave me a chance to discover myself. And the first thing I learned is that I'm an extremely untalented filmmaker. So I went in there for the filmmaking program, for the directing program, and I realized that it's just not something I'm cut out to do. But the silver lining to that cloud was that I also learned that I'd probably make a good producer because I had a good sense for the content. I had a reasonable understanding of the technical side, and I was really good at project management, which you learn if you're in one of these traditional sort of banking consulting type jobs. You learn how to manage processes and and systems. If anything, it taught me that if I had to get into media, the career path would not be director, but would be producer. And so that was probably the lesson there.
When you basically stepped into the industry and you had no background, how was that experience? How do you navigate through it? Because there is a certain stigma of who can be in this industry and become successful. And also, they may superimpose on you thinking that what you could actually do within the media industry. So, how do you navigate through that?
You touched upon a very interesting point there that not a lot of people talk about. So I'll address that. So just to clarify, we are talking about at the time the Bollywood film industry. I was very keen on getting involved with Bollywood films, mainstream films, commercial films, but also films that maybe had a little bit more, what do we say, artistic integrity. So combination of commercial values, but also stuff that really strive to do better, to tell stories in a more realistic, believable manner, not very over the top. And so I moved to India without a plan. Fortunately for me, my wife Aditi was super supportive, and we took this on as a 2-year adventure. And she wanted to work in social development, and because of how meticulous she is, she found a job before we left the US. Me, on the other hand, I had no plan. So my plan was her. It was like, she's going to pay our bills. I'm going to frolic around trying to find something to do and learn in this industry. And 2 years later, we'll pack our bags and come back. And I'd even taken the GMATs before I left. So I knew I had a path to get in using an MBA. And I went to India, and it was exactly as barren as one would expect if you don't know anyone from the industry. There's just no way to communicate with people. And people are particularly unprofessional in Bollywood. There's just, and they take pride in it. There's a pride in the mediocrity that Bollywood espouses, and it shows in a lot of the content. For me, the beginning was quite frustrating. The first couple of months, 2, 3 months, I would try to meet people, and in the 1% chance that they would accept a meeting or agree to meet, there would still be a 99% chance that they would, cancel it the day of, or I'd be like prepping for something for 2, 3 days a week. And then that morning they'd be like, oh, something came up, because it was never a priority for anybody. And I'd been trained and taught to think that my background, my educational experience, my work experience actually were valuable and meant something. But in Bollywood, it probably worked against me, because people are like, oh, who's this guy? He's just like some overeducated smart ass who doesn't, understand how the system works. It doesn't belong here. And I was fortunate, though, eventually, that through a friend of a friend, I got connected to one individual in the film industry, and she was kind enough to agree to meet me out. She postponed maybe 5 times, just like everybody else, but eventually she did meet me. Like, I did have that meeting, and I remember being prepared for it and checking my email through the morning to see will she cancel, because like it had been 2 months and nobody was willing to meet. She didn't cancel. I was just like waiting for the cancellation. It didn't happen. So I'm like, okay, now I have to go. So I rushed out. Very unusual for Bombay. In fact, I couldn't find an auto, and there was just nobody willing to take me, and everybody was rejecting me. So I got into a fight with an auto wala saying, dude, you've got to take me. And he said, no, main kuch nahi karunga. I said, I'm not getting out of the auto. He said, that fine, I'm going to park over here, then you don't get out. So we literally we got to that stage. So finally, somehow, sweatily, messily managed to make it down for that meeting. And it was, fortunate that I was able to convert that into a sort of internship, or like a contract basis employment, if you will. So that was interesting. But again, I think the point you touched upon is like, people try to box you into what they think you already know. They're seldom willing to take chances or take a bet to just to use maybe your base level intelligence or your base ability and say, hey, if this person is overall intelligent, maybe I can get them to do something else. And these are important, because these eventually became some of the pillars on which we started our company. But that's exactly what happened. People looked at me and said, hey, some finance type guy, maybe we'll just get him to do some number crunching and do some finance for us. But he can't be creative possibly if he knows finance. So a lot of the stereotypes kind of were applied to me. In fact, in my first job in India, which is Reliance Entertainment, I came to know about a month or two later that the nickname they used for me behind my back was Wall Street Jare. And I found it very funny, because I liked that nickname. I thought it was cool. I thought it was like, it's aspirational. People like that, but I meant it maybe derogatorily. Until I bumped into the CEO of Reliance Entertainment, a gentleman called Sanjeev Lamba. One day he was having a smoke, and I was downstairs talking to somebody else, and happened to mention something to do with New York. And he came up to me and said, "You're from New York?" I said, "No, I lived there for a few years. I was working there." So he said, well, it turns out he lived in New York, and he lived in the same neighborhood where I used to work. And so we hit it off. And then there was finally somebody who came from the corporate world who like saw some value to whatever skills or experiences I brought. So that kind of gave me the first kind of insight into how the system works, and what you kind of have to do well. But also the woman who hired me, she was heading the marketing division there, and she was actually pretty open and gave me access to every piece of information I needed, was willing to educate me, was willing to introduce me to people. I did get very lucky, to be honest. Like, I did get to see things from the inside. I got access to rooms which I normally would have spent 10, 15 years working my way through. I'm grateful to those people at Reliance Entertainment, the first set of people that hired me and trusted me, because from there on, I was able to use that to build my own path into everything. But yeah, you have to get lucky. I don't think everyone's as fortunate. I know, in fact, so many people that came around then, maybe after, maybe before, and turned around and went back because they just didn't get those opportunities. So in a sense, I have to thank all those people that were responsible.
Let's get to Pocket Aces. Your first investor, Mohan, and he has an interesting story with you. He taking a chance on what you were building with your background. Double click on that experience. How did the conversation go once you planned to pivot immediately the minute his funding hit your bank account?
This may be the first time I'm going to tell the full story, because we've more than returned Mohan's capital and a very, very, very healthy profit. I love Mohan. He's fantastic. I met Mohan through a common friend in Dubai, in fact, where I am now. And my friend introduced me saying, look, this guy wants to invest in films. He's made a few film investments and maybe you guys should talk to him. So we took a meeting. We were excited to meet him. We met him and he talked about Bollywood and why he thought it was interesting as an opportunity. He had this very down to earth, like self-made kind of feeling to him, even though, of course, he came from a wealthy family, but a lot of his wealth he had created himself. And it reminded me a little bit of my parents' generation, where it was like hard-earned money had like more value than just money that was easily inherited. And so he placed a premium on that. And by the end of the conversation, my co-founder Anirudh and I had sufficiently convinced him of our ability and our plan. And he offhand said, look, we were looking to raise 3 crores. He said, I'm willing to put in 1 crore. We were like, that's amazing, right? What kind of meeting converts so quickly? And we were super, super happy. And he said, but I need you to get the other 2 crores so that I have conviction that there's enough people willing to bet. We said, okay, we shook hands, we left. Week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, no other money coming. Finally, it was 2 months in. We used to keep giving updates saying, yeah, good conversations going on here, good positive looking stuff here. But honestly, every conversation was just like would start and then just abruptly hit a wall at some point. About 2 or 3 months in, he called me out of the blue and he said, Ashwin, listen, we spoke and we had agreed that I would give you 1 crore, but you'd get the other 2 crores from somewhere. Honestly, I've earmarked that 1 crore, but you're not closing this round. I'm going to have to deploy that capital myself. I can't just leave it sitting around, or I invest in you. So where are things at? So I decided to come clean. I was like, Mohan, things are not great. We don't have a lot of momentum on the conversations. We believe still in our plan. We think what we're trying to do is worth investing in, but unfortunately, we haven't been able to find the balance money. And I assume that he's going to say, okay, so then, okay, just call me when you have it. We'll figure out at that point. But for now, I'm out. He surprised me and he said, would you be comfortable if I put in the entire 3 crores? And my first reaction was, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, of course I would. I be comfortable? I mean, I would be so grateful. But I decided to play it cool. And I said, I don't know, Mohan, let me see. Let me think about it. Let's see. I don't know if I want that much concentration. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, stop saying this, stop saying this. You're going to, drive him away. And, I went back to him. I spoke to my co-founder, Anirudh, then I went back to him a day later. I said, okay, Mohan, I will reluctantly accept this. And I'm just all the time praying. I'm like, please don't back away. And Mohan was true to form. Very quickly, we moved into paperwork stage. We agreed on deal terms. And before we knew it, everything was done and he was about to wire the money. And this whole process took about 2 months. And it was 2 to 3 months. And in those 2 to 3 months, because we had the money locked up and now we were just focusing on paperwork, we actually had a lot of time to think about what we were building. And along that way, we realized that a lot of the problems we were facing in the industry, a result of the fact that we didn't have distribution. And we didn't have control over distribution. So in Bollywood, either you control distribution, you have access to distributors, or you have access to talent, and talent automatically drives distribution. Because talent can, at any point, if you're a big actor, you will command a number of movie theaters, screens, and you can definitely ensure that a film gets distributed well. And we said that the only way then to combat that is to build distribution somehow. And we felt that digital mediums were offering a really interesting opportunity at the time because YouTube and Facebook had just come to India. Facebook wasn't even doing video. It was just YouTube would be the video platform. Facebook was the social platform. So if you wanted to share a YouTube link, you would paste it into your Facebook, and that's how kind of YouTube also grew. And we said, hey, what if you did something where you built distribution on digital and use that to prove out content, and then eventually the movie guys will come after you and say, hey, you may not have distribution, but you have this, proven IP, and I'm willing to take a bet on that. So that was the play. But it would mean then a lot of the capital that we were about to raise would go towards that and not towards building movies directly. And so we decided, okay, look, that's quite a bit different from what we told Mohan we were going to build. So we had a call with him. He had just sent the money. The money came early December 2014. And we spoke to him mid to late December, around this time, about 7 years ago. We said, hey, Mohan, look, we've been thinking this is the approach we told you was maybe not the ideal approach, and we're thinking this is the approach. And we totally understand if you want your money back at this point, because that would be the thing to do. But we do believe this is investable still. We think, in fact, this is a better approach. So if you'd like to keep your money in, we would by all means utilize it carefully and try to generate a return for you. And Mohan, without batting an eyelid, said, yeah, don't worry about that, Ash. Like, that's fine. I'm not investing in the business. I just don't think there's any other place where I can get a Wharton grad and two Illinois grads for this price. So, so he's like, you can keep the money, just make sure you don't squander it. I worked really hard for it. Just make sure you don't waste it. That's all. That's what happened.
So eventually, an MBA does pay off.
Yeah, it's even better for me because I didn't have to do the MBA. My co-founder did it, and I shared the benefits of that. But yeah, it was, look, these are incredibly brave things to do for somebody to write a $500,000 check, which is not a small sum of money, and just back to people with an idea is a brave thing. And people like that, they're truly, they're called angel investors. They put the word angel in angel investing. For me, one of the, the happiest moments has been to be able to generate that return for him and to return that capital, repay that faith and be like, hey, look, you bet on us. Here's like an extraordinary return for you. And I hope that you're happy that you bet on us because you've done something that is associated with your name forever now. So I'm eternally grateful and always will be to Mohan.
Oh, that's an amazing story. Now you're venture backed. At what point do you need to think about profitability, revenue versus growth?
So let's break this down because now I'm running two companies. The answers are different for each one. So, for quick context, Pocket Aces was eventually the business we built with Mohan's capital, and then a bunch of venture investors joined us on that journey. And Pocket Aces is the content business. We create shows, we create short form content on social media platforms. We run a talent management business, and within Pocket Aces, we also incubated a gaming company, which then we spun out earlier this year, which is called Loco. So Pocket Aces and Loco are two different companies, and to go back to your question, Pocket Aces is on its way to being profitable this year. Most months this year have been profitable on a month-to-month EBITDA basis. Overall, we'll be close to break even at the end of the year as well. And next year, we'll actually have a reasonable profitability. The Pocket Ace business has always been built with a view to being profitable. We recognize that we have to build on very solid unit economics. Our margins on a unit level always been anywhere from the low end 60% to the high end like 95, 97%. So they're very profitable products, and we've managed to control costs overall. We've got a really solid team that is able to do the work of 1.5 people a person, and so it's just incredibly efficient. So that business will be profitable next year and probably will be break even by the end of this year, and not at small numbers. We top line's been doubling almost every year since inception. So in that sense, we're there. Loco is different. Loco is a game streaming platform, and platforms are by definition expensive to build. You are building both the supply of content on the platform as well as the demand for content on the platform. And both those things require significant capital investment upfront. To make things more expensive, there are already dominant players in the market. There are people like YouTube and others who already command a sizable audience and a sizable section of the supply. So there, I don't see us focusing on profitability in the short term. We are focusing on rational economics. We don't want to do stupid stuff and burn money for sure, because that's just not in our DNA. Somewhere the benefits of that middle class upbringing and starting one profitable startup is trickling into the other one. But we will probably be loss making for the foreseeable future, the next 2 to 3 years anyway. That's not to say we won't generate revenue. We are already thinking about the various forms of revenue we can generate. We piloted a bunch of revenue activities. We do have revenue. It's just not significant enough relative to the expenses. You'll see in the next 2 to 3 years, Loco will have significant revenue, but also significant costs. And that's not something we're worried about in the short term.
When you started Pocket Aces, you had taken digital media as your platform, and it was a new space, not a lot of players. But when you looked at Loco and you mentioned that there are already established contenders and competition, how do you make the choice of actually entering a space that already had a number of deep pocketed, seeded businesses?
Yeah, that's a good question. To go back to Pocket Aces, digital media was not a very well understood thing. I remember when I was at Reliance Entertainment, the marketing budgets allocated about 10% for digital and everything else for offline and television and stuff. And today those are probably inverted, I'm guessing. When you look at a Netflix campaign, my sense is like 80-90% of that is digital. I doubt more than that is offline. I think that for us at the time, it was challenging because we had to explain to people what digital meant, why it mattered, why digital distribution mattered, especially advertisers, because they were our primary source of revenue. And to show them ROI and to educate them on how content marketing could be effective, we really had to spend that time and investment educating them. And there were not that many companies. And in fact, even the companies that were there weren't doing a very good job, which is why most of them don't exist anymore. And a lot of them tried but didn't really understand the economics, and they're no longer there. And we had to go slower and grow slower, but we had to educate the advertiser. And today that's resulted in kind of very healthy revenue. And we have obviously a large number of advertisers that work with us across the country. So that was an interesting kind of journey for us. On Loco, however, the problem is not that the space doesn't have players. The problem is that nobody is catering to the user in the manner the user needs. If you think about game streaming specifically, YouTube is a terrific platform. Obviously, a user, I'm sure you are. YouTube is in every phone in India. India is a 90 something percent Android economy. And so YouTube comes pre installed on every phone. However, YouTube is a general video platform. It does not have the ability to cater specifically to gamers like we do. And gaming as a content medium requires certain interactivity and certain features that maybe are not as relevant for general entertainment. So when you think about what a live game stream is, it is essentially a gamer playing a game on their device, either a PC or a mobile device, largely mobile devices in India, streaming that gameplay while simultaneously streaming maybe a box with their own head, talking about what they're doing, maybe giving commentary to their actions. These are long streams. They're not 30-second videos or a minute or 2 minutes long. These sometimes go on for hours. Some of our streamers will stream for 4 or 5 hours at a stretch, single streams. And when you think about the viewers coming in, watching these streams, wanting to interact with these gamers, wanting to maybe participate in a game, play with them, engage with them, learn from them. And all of these require a set of product features that general entertainment platforms, are not incentivized to build. Do they have the technical expertise? Of course they do. Do they have the deep pockets? Of course they do. But do they have the focus and do they have the incentive to build for the category? Not so much. And if you think about YouTube, that's what's been happening. If you go to that YouTube trending tab, it has 4 or 5 sections. It's got like education, gaming, fashion, news, whatever. And each of those categories is getting unbundled. Whether you look at the news, there are a bunch of news aggregators that do news better than YouTube does today, right, in India. The same thing is true for education. A lot of the educators that were once on YouTube today are, either educators at Unacademy or Byju's or one of these large companies. And we felt the same thing was true for both fashion and gaming. There isn't a dedicated fashion platform that's been able to unbundle YouTube, but that's an opportunity. Anyone listening that wants to start it, I'd be a happy investor in it. But gaming is the one where we thought we had a good shot because game streamers use YouTube as a last resort. There is no better platform for them in India where there is also demand. It's a very calculated move to get into that, even though there are deep pocketed investors. That does mean we will have to raise a lot of money and deploy a lot of capital to compete. But I also think the value we're offering, specifically streamers, is just something that YouTube's going to find it hard to match. We are available for them 24/7. We talk to them all the time. They have direct access to us. They influence our product. They demand features which within 30 to 60 days get built into the product and rolled out. And they have a say. This is their platform and they have a say in how it gets built. And we have those conversations all the time. There's just no way that they'll get that from that level of service from YouTube. And where they stream and where they spend their time is where their communities gather. We're already seeing that. We're seeing some very large streamers, whether it's a Scout or a Mavi or even a Jonathan, when they're on the platform, their communities show up. They show up in big numbers. And we're seeing now there are lots of times when we're doing maybe 60-70% of the traffic that YouTube's doing on a given type of stream. The thesis is proving out. And I think that despite the fact that there are multiple players in the market, we're best positioned to do it because we built that direct relationship with the ecosystem. And this is not true with just gamers. We're backing tournament organizers. So some of the best tournament organizers are long-term partners with us, whether it's Villager Esports or Sky Esports or whatever. There's so many of them that we're just working directly with and enabling to grow, that they recognize that we're in it for the long run. They recognize that we're there to support the ecosystem. Last year when PUBG got banned in India, a number of platforms just walked away from the streamers. They said, hey, it's too bad PUBG's banned, so we're just going to go slow. They didn't get paid. Some of them had contracts that were just like terminated. We did the counterintuitive thing. We went to the streamers and said, "Hey, don't worry, we'll take care of you." We were on calls with multiple streamers. We were on live streams with multiple people saying, "Hey, if anyone's a streamer, a PUBG streamer that's been affected by this ban, call us, work with us. We'll bring you onto Loco. We'll make sure you get paid. We'll make sure there's a career path available for you." And today people remember that. And multiple times I've had somebody come to me and say, "Hey, when everybody else left, Loco was there to support us. And so I feel loyalty towards Loco." You won't believe the number of partners that come to us and say, "I can't wait to see Loco become a unicorn." That's just mind boggling. Like, they're like partners. They work with us. They're not part of the company. And yet they want to see us succeed because they know that when we succeed, they will as well. And that's why we believe in the model.
Let's talk about community a bit because it's a very hot topic. A lot of influencers, founders talk about it, initial day one founders as well. I had Ravi Mehta on the pod. He was the chief operating officer for Tinder. He wrote a very interesting article on the entertainment curve. He talked about why Netflix is a success versus QB, which didn't work out. And while I read it, I had a interesting analysis, or rather an assumption there, that for Netflix, you really don't need a community, and they have never really worked on building a community around the content because maybe the user, the consumer, is just watching it for consumption. So the quality of production has to be really high for them to get entertained. But when you look at a Loco, where the creator is also a consumer, there the community part is very important. What do you think about it?
You're absolutely spot on. The fundamental difference, which you pointed out, which I'm so glad you pointed out, is that the creator and consumer come from the same world for Loco. Unlike, say, Netflix, where a producer is often not the consumer. And I'll say this frankly, as a producer of a lot of content, I'm not the consumer for all types of content. Sure, there are a lot of the shows that I make, I'm also the consumer for. But there's a majority of content that we make that I'm not the consumer for. We're catering towards people who like food, travel, lifestyle, information, short sketches. I can't possibly be the consumer for everything. And so there's obviously the community efforts there are harder, and you need people that are from those communities to curate those communities. Loco, on the other hand, you're absolutely right that most of the creators are from the community. They are, and it's like any offline sport, like a traditional sport. If you watch cricket, chances are you probably grew up playing some of it. It's unlikely that you have an interest watching, but you've never really played. It's usually there's some element of I play and I also watch experts play. And so the same thing happens in gaming. People that watch gamers play, they have an interest in the game. They've played themselves, or they've tried to play. They may not be competitive professional athletes, but they certainly have an interest. That, in a sense, makes our job a little bit easier because then the creator is also curating for the community. Now, there's one other fundamental difference between, say, traditional content and gaming content. When you look at artists who are quote unquote creating, say, art on a Netflix or a streaming platform or movies or whatever, there is often a bias. And this is something that we actively try to fight at Pocket Aces, but I see it on so many different talented artists. They create something that they believe in, not necessarily anything that has to do with what the audience wants. There is this defiance almost and this arrogance to say, "Hey, I don't want to create what somebody wants me to create. I want to create something I believe in, something I'm passionate about." And that's great if you're a painter, because the cost of painting is just not expensive at all. The easel doesn't cost much money, neither does the paint. The only value is your time then. So you're free to do whatever you will with that time, and you're the only one benefiting from the sale of that art. But when you're creating a film, you owe it to all the collaborators on that film or a show. You owe it to the distribution platform and to the consumers that you give them something worth paying for. Because this is an expensive medium. It's not something that you can just fund, an individual can just fund themselves. There are a few individuals that could, but by and large, most creators, most directors and writers cannot fund their own films. So you have a fiduciary responsibility, in addition to your creative responsibility to yourself, to deliver something that can be monetized. And that's where most films and most shows fail, because the creator does something they want to do, regardless of what the audience wants. Gaming is different. Gaming is so different because the creator there wants to cater to their audience. They want the fandom, they want the adulation, they want that support, because that's what helps them perform better when they're competing. And it's like an athlete in a sport. I mean, Virat Kohli is energized by the crowd in a stadium. When he's playing a game against Pakistan, the home advantage is huge for him. Versus if he's playing in a hostile environment where, let's say, India, Australia, he's playing in Australia, it's much harder there. because you don't have as much of a crowd support. For athletes and professionals, it's always good to have a fan community that kind of supports you. And again, our job is easier there because the creators curate that community. We incentivize it. We lubricate the system. We make sure there's less friction. We make sure that fans can access them easily and they can communicate and they can interact. And we can build tools for engagement. We can build chats and we can build like features for them to play games together. But ultimately, the community has to get built by the creator, and that's why the ones who can build community better do very well. They just do better.
How do you really figure out what the audience wants, and specifically for a country like India?
Pocket Aces, we've always believed that content needs to be iterative. It was an interesting one. My brother used to live in Amsterdam for about a year and a half. And so I visited him once, and he lived very close to the Van Gogh Museum. And I never consider myself a connoisseur of art. I don't fully understand art as much as I'd like to. And so I went to the museum, like hoping, okay, whatever, we'll just go see some stuff and get out there. We'll see a few paintings and be like, wow, so beautiful, and we'll leave. But what I saw there was, it just blew me away because the art, of course, is what you will make of it. You might find it great, you might not find it great. It's subjective. But the process behind the art just blew me away. I saw that for every painting that Van Gogh did in his short career, he had maybe a 10, 12-year career where he did almost all of his artwork in that period. Um, and he died at the end of that period. But for every piece of art, every finished piece of art, there would be multiple practice sketches. He would use pencils and charcoal to just practice out different things, try different lighting before finalizing on the art and building the final piece. And the final artwork looked like it was, amazing, so well thought, but you realize that behind that there were 10, practice rounds. And that really led me to believe that content is much the same. A lot of our writers and directors in India, they think you sit in a room and you dream and suddenly inspiration will happen, hit you, and you'll get it, that one brilliant idea. But it doesn't work like that. Everybody likes the Archimedes story better, where you're sitting in the bathtub and suddenly Eureka happened. But nobody thinks about people like Van Gogh who really actually spent hours perfecting that art. And so I realized at that time that content is much the same. To get something, you have to iterate on it 6 or 7 times, and it's not going to always be pretty. So we decided the way to do that for our company, for Pocket Aces, was you start low on the production value and cost spectrum and build towards high. Each time gathering whatever information and data you can to improve the next iteration. So you build something short, you can start as small as just putting a little Instagram poll on a story saying, hey, I'm thinking of this topic and that topic. What do you guys like? And you just see what people are saying. You see how people are reacting. And then that can form the basis for a little meme. That's 5-second meme that you spend maybe an hour making. Again, your investment is so small. You've spent an hour. One person has done it, very little resource. And that meme tells you some more. And then you can build a 3-minute, 4-minute sketch that takes probably a week to build. It takes maybe 10, 15 people to make it. And that gives you a lot of info. And then you can do 2, 3 such sketches. And all of a sudden, you have so much of data telling you that, hey, these things work, these are funny, these are not funny. And you can build that show. That show can be 20 lakhs, it could be 1 crore, it could be 10 crores, it could be 30 crores. But like you can suddenly build something with a lot more surety. And that iterative process is how you have to build expensive pieces of content. Little Things is a function, is a product of this process. It went from memes to short sketches that eventually made its way to a bigger sketch that we then incorporated a lot of elements from that sketch into a trailer for a very inexpensive season 1. That season 1 then blew up, became a very, slightly more expensive season 2, a very expensive season 3 and 4. And that IP has just been built in that technique. So we do this, and Little Things is one example, but we've done this for What the Folks, for Adulting, for Operation MBBS, now for Clutch. Like so many of our shows follow the same kind of playbook. And I'm surprised more people don't do it. I'm surprised the platforms don't do it. When you see the number of shows that Netflix makes to get a hit, for every like 20 shows, there may be one hit. That's a 5% success rate. We've got maybe an 85, 90% success rate. I wonder why they don't learn from creators like us and improve the process.
You believe that success is your best teacher. Can you double click on that?
Yeah, this is interesting, right? Because you hear a lot of people say failure is the best teacher, teaches you the most. I actually think success teaches you even more than failure. The worst kind of success is the success which you don't know how it happened, where you're like, I don't know how this happened. Like, I won the lottery. I can't repeat it. There's no way I can repeat that success. But I found that in our time, in running these businesses these past 7 or 8 years, I've always learned the most from when we've succeeded because I've been able to pinpoint and narrow down some of the reasons and some of the patterns. Like life is about being able to recognize patterns and doubling down on patterns that are result in positive outcomes. We've often been able to find those patterns in our own behavior, in our approach, in our process, and just double click on those each time to repeat outcomes. So I remember when we were raising money from Sequoia for the first time, we had one big successful video and everything else was like middling and hadn't really worked. And I remember the partner at Sequoia asked me, he said, how are you going to, it's a hits driven business. How are you going to repeat this? And I was just like, but we have a process yields results. And it didn't make any sense. He was like, that doesn't make sense. I'm in the venture business. We are also a hits driven business. And no matter what process you have, it's the power law. 10% of your bets will result in 80% of your returns. So I found it hard to explain at the time and articulate at the time. But then we did the next best thing. We demonstrated it by investing in that process and improving it over time. And now it's gotten to the point where it's not just 2 founders or 3 founders that are running the process. This is in Pocket Aces, we are a 200 and something person team, and multiple team members, multiple showrunners, multiple video creators are using the same process to build it successfully. And we managed to distribute the knowledge, which again is traditionally a weak point for Indian art, and you have to overcome that.
How do you get to a sustainable product market fit?
So first of all, I'd like to say that product market fit is always temporary. The market always changes, and therefore the product always has to change to fit. So I don't think it's one of those things where you check the box, say, okay, I have product market fit and I'm done now. Because you could be Facebook. Facebook was one of the platforms to get product market fit very early and really scaled on that product market fit. But then the market started to change over time, and then it had to. Today, I would argue Instagram is probably where most of the value in Facebook comes from, because Facebook was able to adapt to that evolving market with either iterating its product or just buying or building new products. For us in the content business, each product stands alone by itself. And so for each product, it's both an advantage and a disadvantage. It is a disadvantage because it means that having built one successful product doesn't guarantee you the next success. You just have to rebuild from scratch. But it's also an advantage because you get the chance to improve the product or change the product based on where the market is evolved. So if I'm creating a season 4 of Little Things versus season 3 of Little Things, I already know what the market's looking like after that, what other content has come out, what my saturation point is for the market, what worked in other content, what worked in my own content after that. So I have that time to almost evolve my product and iterate my product to fit the market. So on the content side, that's how we think about it. On Loco, it's slightly different. The product itself, because these products require a lot of engineering efforts to get built, we almost don't build any product or feature without heavily testing from our user base what they're looking for, what they want. And we've created that almost that co-opted process where the consumer and the creator have a say, and we'll always have channels of communication with them. We're talking to people on the phone. We're like multiple touch points, social media, of course, and other touch points. We have a customer service team that's talking to users all the time. How you maintain it is by constantly talking to users, constantly understanding where the market is, and then evolving your product to fit that market. Unfortunately, it's like fitness. Fitness is not constant. It's not like, hey, I got a six pack today. I'm like, I can run a marathon. I'm fit. Because a year later, you're going to be unfit because you've just not taken care of that fitness consistently. It's one of those things you have to keep looking at all points.
You run 2 businesses,
Mhm.
and you have very clear, distinctive frameworks for both of them. And you clearly understand what overlaps and what doesn't, which is amazing because speak to a number of founders and they may be running multiple product lines or they may be running multiple businesses. I usually see that they just use the same framework across all platforms, even if they're not the same product, right? Or not serving the same audience. So this is really great that when you answer something, you break it down into what Pocket Aces is, how that has evolved, and what Loco requires to grow.
It's almost out of necessity. The reason we spun the business out and separated it into 2 as well was this, because the DNA required for each business is quite different. Some of the values we practice at Pocket Aces, some of the things we hold dear to us in terms of our operating principles don't apply in Loco. They're very different in Loco. Obviously, our customer segments are different, our consumers are different, but also the teams required to build them are very different. They have very different DNA. They require different approaches to handle. So we have to think about it in that manner, and which is why it made sense. It was just getting increasingly hard to run both businesses in the same manner, using the same behavioral approach and style. It was inevitable that we had to think about it separately.
Brilliant. Your secret superpower is being decisive. That's what your founding team believes. So let's double click on that and how that has helped you and how have you been able to inculcate it?
We have placed emphasis on decision-making frameworks and using that rubric to take calls. Sometimes the riskiest course of action is inaction. And so you have to take action, you have to respond if you're behind, and you have to be proactive if you're ahead. So in terms of being decisive, it's the only way for a founder to survive and thrive. How to take decisions. We've evolved a few times our approach towards that, and there's a few principles that we follow. One, of course, is problem I see plaguing a lot of companies, which we call the hippo effect, which is the highest paid person's opinion. And often decisions are taken by the person who gets paid the most, or the most senior person. We've tried hard, especially at Pocket Aces, to not ever be a hippo effect kind of company where decisions are being taken by just people based on seniority. That we've had an approach where we listen to all opinions, and then the owner of any decision takes that decision. Now, the owner of a decision can vary from decision to decision, from task to task. So there could be a process where some individual is an owner, and there are people above them too, but they are not the owner of that decision. So we let people take their own decisions where they're the owner of a particular task. That's something we try to do. And for others, we have a simple policy. It's if you are not the owner of a decision, you can disagree, but you have to commit. So you can disagree, but you have to commit. And that becomes, again, another tenet that we follow. If you use some of these frameworks in tandem, you often will take decisions. You will be biased towards decision making, and you won't fall trap to analysis paralysis and forever be thinking, oh, what do I do? What do I do? And you'll get some of those decisions wrong. The key is to then improve that decision making process. The ownership of who takes a decision doesn't have to change, but how you come to that decision, what thinking you use to come to that decision, that's what you can improve on. And then hopefully that improves your overall track record.
That's brilliant. Actually, that is a summary of a very impressive book called How to Decide.
Mhm.
And the tenet of that book is that the two things that really influence an outcome is decision making process and luck.
Mhm.
Usually what we do is what we say is that if the outcome is great, our decision making process was good.
Mhm.
If the outcome is bad, then our decision making process is bad or wasn't good.
Yeah,
Actually, that is not true,
correct.
because what you cannot control is the luck part. So what you need to see always after the outcome, that how much of your decision has really impacted the outcome.
That's fantastic, and I should read that book.
And would you
Yeah.
make the same decision if the outcome wasn't as expected?
Yeah, but people often conflate inputs and outputs. So they're two very
Mm.
different things. And you have to be able to separate what the input is and what the output is. And of course, they impact each other. So it's not like they're unrelated, but
Yeah.
you can't assume that by putting input, you will receive output. And I do think luck is a huge factor, but I also believe that the harder you work, the luckier you get. So you really have to put yourself in a position to receive luck. And that it's not possible for someone to be purely unlucky all the time. It means there's something missing in their process.
Let's go back before we get to the exciting rapid fire
Mhm.
to two simple questions. And you talked about analysis paralysis.
Mhm.
An initial team, usually coming from a corporate background or coming from a well educated backgrounds, spend what I have seen a good amount of time on research, analysis, data versus execution. So, how do you balance that? Because at some point, that research, data, graph all becomes paralysis and execution doesn't happen.
Mhm. Honestly, I don't think there's any secret sauce to balancing it. You've just got to be biased towards decisions. And there's this little, if you think about it as an axis, right? You've got not meaningful to meaningful, and you've got irreversible to reversible on the other axis. And anything, the only time you need to really spend time analyzing is if you're taking a meaningful, irreversible decision. For all the other quadrants, I am actually just in favor of taking the decision. Like for things that are reversible and not meaningful, I don't even take the decisions myself. I ensure whoever else is in the process takes ownership. For stuff that's irreversible but not meaningful, I still don't get that involved, but I'm
Mm.
FYI'd on it. And for stuff that's meaningful but reversible, I'm still FYI'd on. So the only decision I really spend my time on is anything that's irreversible and meaningful. And that's when you do a lot of analysis, you do a lot of data, because those decisions, like I said, can't be reversed.
Absolutely. It basically summarizes two concepts. One is meaningful, irreversible is urgent and important.
Mhm.
And the second is the principle of agent and principle. If you want the job done, you need to do it yourself. If you want the job outsourced, the agent is always going to optimize for their best
Mhm.
benefit.
Yeah,
So the outcome may not be as you would like. So it depends on how important and urgent the job is.
absolutely.
The last thing is, when you hire, how do you hire the best, manage and retain them when you are on a small budget?
The answer, again, I'll break it into Pocket Aces and Loco because there's two different answers. Because Pocket Aces, honestly, at the time we entered the industry, today everybody has enough work. It's not,
Mm.
I doubt if you're a creative person, reasonably talented, you have multiple options for employment. You can do freelance employment. You have career paths that are starting to get created at organizations. You're not going to be short of a job. This was not true 5 or 6 years ago when we started. And so at the time, for a creator, the only jobs available were freelance gigs, and they often were unpredictable. You had to hunt each time you were hungry. It's like animals in the wild, whatever, animal kingdom. Every time they're hungry, they have to hunt. If they don't hunt, they go hungry. And that when we showed up and we said, here's a career section on our website, here's a career path, here's stability to your job, and here's the ability to create quickly. That's the other thing, which is you join the company and within 2 weeks, there's a product that you've worked on that's going out to the public. It's getting released versus these large film companies where it takes you 2 years for your first release and you're being held hostage until then. It was just an attractive proposition, Pritesh. I mean, people were just like, they were craving the creative job and the stability of a more traditional kind of corporate job. But with the culture of a creative job, with the mindset and approach of a creative job, they wanted to be able to not be like tied down in like corporate attire and corporate protocols and could be cool and chill and casual. At the same time, they just wanted to create. They just wanted to have access to consumers and put the content out. So in the beginning, we didn't have to do much. We just had to create good content, which we did by attracting the first few good people who took a bet on us. Those people brought in the next set of people, and so that kind of meritocratic cycle kind of continued for a while. Today, it's more competitive. Today, since there are multiple options, you have to make sure you are at the cutting edge of creative so that you're attractive for people to work at. And of course, you have to match market pay. There's no longer an excuse to say, I don't have the budgets. You have to find the budgets, which is why we focused a lot on revenue growth. We focused a lot on being able to build the company to a point where we can afford to pay market salaries. We weren't paying market salaries in 2017 or even maybe some part of 2018. But from 19 onwards, we said we're now at the size and scale where there's enough competition that if we don't pay market rate, somebody else will. So today we certainly compete on economics. We compete on creativity. And we have a culture that is just honestly unparalleled. And I'm saying this myself, and it sounds a bit arrogant, but there have been a number of people that at various points have resigned from the company, moved on because they got 20% more somewhere else, and then have come back to the company saying, hey, listen, I'm okay with my old salary, my old whatever. I just want the same culture back. And I won't take names, of course, but there's, this is actually two examples from this week that are have reached out and expressed an interest to come back. So that it's just if the environment is psychologically safe, it is secure, it provides opportunity and promotes creativity and meritocracy. That's half the battle there, and that's the hardest part of the battle actually. Loco is slightly different. We entered Loco, which is a tech startup in the most competitive ecosystem. This is the year where I keep reading every day there's a new unicorn. So it's probably 45 odd unicorns since the start of this year. Everybody has a lot of money. Everybody has more money than us, but we don't get to play on a small salary. Yes, maybe a core team is willing to take a lot of equity and smaller salaries. So the core team is probably paid below market. But after that, you're like second level and on, everyone's paid market, and market changes every day. There's a funny joke that my co-founder Anirudh was making the other day when he said our colleague from HR asked him, hey, we should start thinking about appraisals when we should do appraisals. And he said, what appraisals? I've been doing appraisals every week. I'm recomping somebody else to match the market because every week they get an offer and they come back asking to be comped, right? So, it's actually representative of what's happening in the ecosystem. There's a lot of capital. There's very little talent chasing that capital. So people are getting paid, frankly, absurd amounts. I actually don't think in the long term, those amounts are justified. But in the short term, if you have to survive, you have to, live to see another day. So we compete there. We compete with dollars. We compete with, again, to some degree with culture. But we've not been a work from an office company, right? Because most of the streaming platform was built during the lockdown. I've not even met most of the team members. In fact, I met some of our leadership members for the first time last week at our leadership offsite in Dubai. So it's just, it's a little bit harder to use culture and those soft tools to attract people here. So often it is people like to be challenged. So the scale of the problem you're solving, who you're up against, people like to take on big companies. So the fact that we're challenging some of the incumbents is attractive. And of course, then compensation at market levels are above.
Let's get into a rapid fire. 3 questions, 1 word, 1 sentence. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
The toughest thing about your job?
Context switching. Because I have multiple jobs and everything involves a different aspect.
1 book or a blog that has transformed you personally or professionally?
I'll tell you both a book and a blog. These are cliched answers, so I'm afraid it's not exciting. But Sapiens as a book and Wait But Why as a blog, both have had a profound impact on how I have learned to understand how other people think.
Both of them are just amazing. Your most favorite superhero?
I'm not a superhero guy. I don't have a good answer for this. I'm not a superhero guy. I follow the traditional stuff. I watched the movies that like really break out. So I watched the Batman movies. I watched maybe Iron Man. I haven't even watched a lot of the Marvel films. So I don't know. Superhero. I have never been one to idolize too many individuals. I like different things about different people. So there's some really interesting, obviously, tech leaders of our century that I'm a big fan of. Right, there's things that say Bill Gates has done that I admire. There's things that say Elon Musk has done I admire, and similarly for Jobs and Zuckerberg and all these people. But there's no one person who I think this is it. This is who I like to be like. So I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for you there. Does that mean I'm not getting the hamper?
I'm not Karan Johar.
No, what a bummer. I was looking forward to a nice hamper, Pritish.
Well, Ashwin, that was a great place to close this conversation. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure talking to you.